Go. All right, good evening and welcome everyone. I'm really glad you're here. My name is Tammy Curtis and I will be your host tonight. The Parent Connective is an event made possible through a small grant I received from the Utah State College of Arts and Sciences and Bear River Health Department. It's also a collaboration with the Sorensen Legacy Foundation Center for Clinical Excellence and other local agencies such as CAPSA. The webinar series was created with one core belief in mind, that parenting isn't meant to be done alone, nor is it meant to be done perfectly. So many parents today are carrying quiet questions, doubts, and worries, often while being surrounded by loud advice, social media trends, and unrealistic expectations. This series is an invitation to step out of that noise and into something more grounded and practical. We have amazing resources and clinical expertise in our community, and over the next several months, we'll explore topics around parent management training, shame-free conversations, understanding adversity and resilience, supporting intense emotions in our children, and family connection and repair. We'll work together to understand what's happening underneath the behavior, learning how connection changes outcomes, building skills that support regulation for both kids and for us, practicing repair when things don't go the way we hoped, and letting go of shame and unrealistic expectations. Our conversations are less about doing more and more about seeing things differently, noticing patterns, slowing reactions, and responding with intention rather than reaction. Our sessions are led by trusted community partners and clinicians who work with families every day. Before we begin, I want to name something important. This is a judgment-free space. Parenting is complex, especially in today's world. Wherever you are in your journey, whether things feel steady or overwhelming, you belong here. Parenting takes a village. You're welcome to participate in whatever way feels comfortable to you, cameras on or off. You're welcome to ask questions in the chat. I'll be monitoring the chat, and our presenter is fine with those interruptions to ask questions, so please feel free to ask. Also, you're welcome to just simply listen. Because these sessions are recorded, they will be available for viewing at a later date. You're welcome to share them with friends or family. When we get those posted, I'll let you know. I also want to let you know that we do have some social media platforms. We have Facebook and Instagram, which is parent.connective, where you can see our schedule and our upcoming webinars. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I'm so excited to welcome our presenter tonight and tell you a little bit about her. Kara Tim is a graduate student in communication and a community awareness educator at CAPSA. She leads community education efforts and serves as the lead advisor for the CAPSA Youth Council, facilitating impactful communication with both adult and youth audiences on topics related to healthy relationships and violence prevention. Kara, we are so lucky to have you present to us tonight. She will be presenting on shame-free conversations, and I just couldn't be more excited to turn the time over to her and welcome her to the Parent Connective this evening. So, Kara, I'll go ahead and unshare, and then you'll be able to take over.
Okay. Let's see if that goes through. Okay, how's that looking for you all?
Looks great.
Good? Okay. All right, so I'll go ahead and get started. Like Tammy said, my name is Kara Tim. I'm the community awareness educator at CAPSA. I always like to give a little background on what that means specifically. So in addition to being the lead youth council advisor here at CAPSA, I am also over all adult-facing presentations that are focused on violence prevention and awareness. So if an organization asks me to come speak, I will go do that. I will speak on what our services are, who we serve, the communities that we work with, as well as trauma-informed approaches. And then this one specifically being the safe adult framework, how to have shame-free conversations with youth. And it's an amazing role. I get to work with youth and adults, which is really fulfilling in so many different ways. So I'm really excited to be here today and to continue that work with you all. Before I get too much into what this topic entails, I like to give a little bit of background on what CAPSA is for those that are unfamiliar. But specifically, CAPSA was founded in 1976 as the Cache Valley Rape Crisis Team. So during that time on the campus of Utah State University, there were a couple high profile rape cases going on that were making national news. And as you can imagine, at that time, there wasn't a lot of information on how they can help survivors, how to prevent those things from happening. And so the Dean of the College of Natural Resources, Thad Box, he was hearing these things, he was hearing it from his students. And his wife came home one day, Jenny Box, and she said to Thad, "We're going to start housing survivors in our home." And he will tell you that he said, "Okay, 2 to 3 families a year, that's something that we can handle." 3 families were brought to their home in that very first week, showing that there is a need in this community, and we've only grown since then. We've got a beautiful location here in Logan, as well as branching out into Preston, Idaho, where we have a remote office that we have a community liaison / caseworker at. So doing what we can to serve the community in as many ways possible. And so I will share a little bit of information at the end on how you can contact us if you have any questions, what that looks like. But today's focus is specifically how to have shame-free conversations with youth. And the topic that we're going to focus on is specifically online harm and violence. And so it's at this point that I always ask people to think about what that means. Keep it to yourself for a minute. I think a lot of people hear that and a couple of different ideas come into their mind, and that's great. I think a lot of people have big feelings on that, which is something we're going to address a little bit later on. So think about online harm and violence. Think about what that maybe means to you, what you think that means, and how that makes you feel, because we're going to address that a little bit later. But before I move forward, I do like to say that when talking about online harm and violence, it can bring up some sensitive topics. I will be talking about youth and things that can be unsafe for them online and what that sounds like and what that means. So if at any point this becomes too sensitive for you, or it's just not something that you're comfortable talking about, that's completely okay. Please feel free to exit out at any point. I won't take any offense to that. I know that this can be a very sensitive conversation. So just keep that in mind as we're going through this. Just make sure you take that time to take care of yourself. But to begin, I like to go over some workshop guidelines just so that we're all on the same page. The first is that participation is voluntary. I'm not going to call on anybody. You all are free to put your questions in the chat, whatever you're comfortable sharing. And then again, openness and honesty. I think that this workshop is really great when we are engaged in the conversation, when we're learning from each other. But again, just feel whatever you want to say, just make sure you feel comfortable sharing that. And then going along with that, be respectful. I'm pretty certain we're all capable of doing that. If somebody shares something that maybe you have big feelings about or you don't necessarily agree with, that's completely okay. Just if you choose to respond, be respectful in how you respond, or just don't respond at all, the things they teach in school. And then the last thing is confidentiality. That's the big one that I want to hit on. So everybody in the state of Utah is a mandatory reporter over the age of 18. And as a facilitator of this, I am also a mandatory reporter. And so if you choose to share something that discloses either the threat of harm or actual harm to a minor, so anybody under the age of 18, or anybody that's a vulnerable adult, which is over the age of 65, or somebody who has a disability, then I am required by law to report that to the proper authorities. And again, this is recorded, so if you disclose that to me in this workshop, that will be recorded. However, if something's going on that you want to talk about, please feel free to reach out to CAPSA and ask any questions through there as well. I just like to share that ahead of time so that we're all empowered in what we choose to share today with each other. But I will go ahead and get into our topic. Okay, so we're going to begin this conversation by thinking about what we as adults want for the youth in our lives. And so take a minute, think about that. What do you want for the youth in your life? And feel free to just put your answers in the chat. And I've got that pulled up too, so I can see it as well. So what do you want for the youth in your life? What's the most important thing that you want for them? Success and happiness. I like that one. I like that a lot. Safe and happy, really good. And we'll touch on those as well. Any others? Be safe, happy, know their worth. That's a really good one. Confidence as well. Safety and loved. Yes. These are all great. Let's see, anybody else? Okay. All right. Those are really good responses. I love those. Safety, awareness, ability to become a healthy adult. I don't get that one though. I think that one's a really great one. Yeah. So it sounds like there's a common theme here with all of your responses, and it sounds like you all want them to be free from harm, whether that's them perpetrating harm, they're experiencing it, whatever that might be. We want them to be safe. We want them to be happy overall. And so I think that's completely normal to have that desire. That's exactly what we want for the youth in our lives, to have that quality of life, to be happy, to be safe. And so today's workshop is designed to help all of you potentially meet that desire. Okay. So we'll kind of pivot a little bit and talk about them and their safety. That's kind of the big focus of this, obviously, today. And so I want you all to think about what life feels like when the youth in your life are not safe. So you don't have to share. I'll just give you guys a moment to think about that. But for me, I know that the youth that I work with, if they're not safe, or if I know that they're not safe, I'm stressed. I'm taking that home with me. It's almost a little bit frustrating, and there's a sense of losing that control with them that can be pretty frustrating, pretty overwhelming to feel those feelings all around. And so life just probably doesn't feel that great when they're not safe. And so let's kind of just think about that as we have this conversation of what life feels like when they're not safe, so that we can hopefully approach these conversations with them in a way that addresses that we don't want them to be feeling these things, and we also don't want to feel them as well. Now, on the flip side of that, what life feels like when they are safe, I can only imagine it's a great feeling. I know that the youth council, when they are talking about healthy things, healthy relationships, things that are going on in their lives that are good and they're excited about, it's almost like a relief. It's very relaxing to know that they're out of harm's way, that they're learning from mistakes if they are making them, and just life overall feels pretty good. And I assume that a lot of you feel that way when the youth in your lives are safe as well. And so, again, that's really healthy to have that desire. And my goal is that we all walk away feeling confident that we can achieve that safe life that we're imagining for them. So now, when we think about that safe life and we're picturing how that feels, sometimes that's not always a reality. And chances are they're not always going to be safe. And I think that's something that's pretty big that not a lot of people address. We're not always sure how to keep the youth in our lives safe. But specifically, what are we keeping them safe from? Those are things that we call barriers to safety. And so some barriers to safety could be maybe they just got their license and they're brand new on the road. That's clearly a pretty big safety for everybody that's driving. Maybe they've got some friends that aren't necessarily great to be around. They're pressuring them to do things that we necessarily don't want them doing. Or maybe they're online, they're talking to people that they've never met. That's that big online harm and violence thing that I was talking about. But with youth specifically, there are a ton of barriers to safety. And the one I want to focus on today and really break down and address is fear. Fear is the biggest barrier to safety that we can address. And so that can be fear of saying the wrong thing, not saying enough, fear that the youth will get hurt, maybe even fear that they'll make the same mistakes that we made when we were growing up. And so that makes sense given the fact that the world probably isn't as safe as it once was or as it ever should have been. And so we're constantly navigating whether we should speak up about things that they're experiencing or if maybe we're trying not to be overbearing. However, it's so much better for us to have these conversations and be mindful about how we're having them as opposed to being too afraid to act, being too afraid to have those conversations with them. And so the focus of today really is to have these shame-free conversations that we all feel comfortable in, that we all feel safe having, and that they're judgment-free. That is the core of shame-free conversations. And so I've been throwing around that term a lot, shame-free conversations. Now, what exactly that means is just a space where whoever's involved in the conversation feels valued, they feel heard, and like their feelings are prioritized, that they're not feeling any pushback or any judgment for what's being said. And so with shame-free conversations specifically, they're usually going to be about sensitive topics. And so sensitive topics for youth can be things like bullying, mental health, dating, whether it's a good relationship or a bad relationship. Either way, it's a very sensitive conversation. And then again, today, we're going to be focusing on that online harm and violence. And what makes a topic sensitive is our comfort levels and how we're feeling about them when we're talking about it. And so, again, you don't have to share. You can share in the chat if you want to, and we can read those. But just take a minute and think about a time when you had a sensitive conversation with somebody. Think about how comfortable you felt. Think about what they did or maybe didn't do to make you feel comfortable. And just so think about that. And when you think about those things, I think it makes it a little bit easier to start these conversations with youth, knowing what made you comfortable so that maybe you can repeat those things or potentially not repeat them if somebody didn't make you comfortable. I always like to share an example at this point, just while people are thinking about their own experiences. I know that my current fiance now, when we first started dating, our families lived very far apart. And I knew that when holidays would come around, that was a conversation we were going to need to have. And we're both very close with our families. And so this is a healthy dynamic where we're thinking about how to best navigate this. So I want to emphasize it doesn't always have to be an unhealthy thing where these shame-free conversations come up. They happen in all types of relationships. But he told me, however we figure this out, we're going to be okay. And whatever we decide really isn't going to be that big of a deal overall, and things are going to work out. And so starting that conversation off, addressing how I was feeling nervous, addressing that things will work out and that everything's going to be okay, I think was a really great way to build that foundation for a shame-free conversation. Now, that's just my example. That might not apply to everybody, but just think about those things. I think, again, it does make it a lot easier to start these conversations if we think about our own experience with them. And so I'll get into that in terms of self-experience a little bit later on in this as well. Okay, that went a little too far. Okay, and so I've thrown around the term safe adult a couple times now, and now I want to really break down what exactly that means. And so the best way to do this is by addressing how each part of this framework addresses fear and breaks it down. So SAFE is an acronym. It's a research-based acronym that we like to use at CAPSA that just makes it a little bit easier to understand how to have these conversations. And so we start with being specific. I like to say that you wouldn't go into a debate not knowing who you're talking to, not knowing what the topic is, and just overall not feeling prepared. And so when we're specific with our conversations, we can break down those nerves, break down that fear, and have this conversation with a little bit of a better understanding of where the other person is coming from and what we're feeling and what we know about it as well. And then with being approachable, fear can show up as tension in how we hold ourselves, how we talk. So somebody that's crossing their arms, looking down, lowering their voice, or just coming off pretty angry isn't going to be as approachable of a person. And youth pick up on that very easily. So if we're showing those things, if we're showing that closed off body language, they're going to pull back. They might not continue the conversation, and they might still continue either those harmful behaviors or still be experiencing those harmful situations. And so we want to make sure that we're approachable, not just ourselves, but our environment as well. And again, I'll get into these a little bit more just after we go through this breakdown. And then the next one that we have, part of the framework, is feelings. This is the one that I think everybody likes to talk about. Everybody has big feelings, big emotions, and that's completely normal. I think all of us have had a point where we may have blown up at somebody or been a little too harsh when we're talking, and again, completely normal. However, I think when having these conversations, there's a big fear that maybe we will have those moments. Maybe we'll blow up at the kid, or we'll just shut down and not continue the conversation. That's a pretty real fear to have. And so when we address our feelings, when we check our emotions, we can make sure that the focus is fully on the youth and making sure that they're safe. Then the last step of the framework is to empower. This is all about normalizing the conversation. And so when we show them that these conversations are normal to have, that they're everyday things that we can talk about, we take the shame completely out of the conversation. We show them that these are okay things to talk about, and they're actually really important to talk about. So we just empower them to continue these conversations with us, to reach out to us if they need help, or to seek out resources if maybe the conversation didn't go as well as we had hoped. Okay. All right, so I broke down that framework. We're going to go a little bit deeper into this. the first step being specific. And so, like I said, we want to know the topic of what we're talking about with the youth. And so, best way to break down that fear is to prepare early on. So, with this framework, I like to say that being specific happens before the conversation starts. So, specifically, we want to know the topic. And again, today, the topic we chose is online harm and violence. This is the one that I present on the most because it's something that we have found is a pretty serious issue, not just in our community, but nationwide. A little bit of background, we were working with the local police stations around here. We were just trying to figure out what gaps we could fill, conversations that need to be had. And unfortunately, online harm and violence has been going on for some time now, and it has led to higher suicide rates within youth. And so that's something that we really want to address and make sure that we are talking to youth about these issues, potentially before they become even bigger. So the hope is that by having these conversations about online harm and violence, that we can teach them these healthy behaviors before they engage in them. But going back to knowing the topic, with online harm and violence, we define that as coercing people into sending explicit images, videos, or messages, and then threatening to distribute them. It might sound pretty familiar. Specifically with that and knowing the topic, we want to know what the youth are saying about it, what vocabulary they're using, because I know that for me, when they're talking about things, a lot of the terms they say just go right over my head because they make up their own words, as I'm sure you've all heard. And so we really want to know how to key into these things when they're talking about it. And so online harm and violence can have a couple different names or a couple different tactics that fall underneath it. So for example, asking for nudes, catfishing, cyberbullying, digital harassment, online extortion, and digital coercion. And then anybody in the chat, if there is a term that you're unfamiliar with, put it in there and I can define it. I think a couple of these I didn't know when I first started this presentation, so I had to do my own research into them. I'll give you a moment just to see if anybody needs those defined. All right. Okay, good. We're on the same page. Oh, catfishing. Yes, I always get that one too because that term doesn't even make sense at all of what it could mean. So catfishing is when somebody pretends to be somebody else in an online environment. But with that, that means, or an example of that being, if somebody is on Instagram and they message another person pretending to be somebody else. So a very generic example is if somebody creates a fake profile pretending to be a celebrity and they message somebody else asking for money saying they need help with something, somebody that's influential, or sometimes they try and do somebody that's conventionally attractive just to entice that person to do whatever they need. I think that's the simplest way to define catfishing, but yeah, just being or pretending to be somebody that you're not in an online environment. And as you can imagine, that's something that does happen to youth so much, and there are so many dangers that can be associated with that. Okay, then again, with knowing the topic, it's really important to know how prevalent this is in our communities. So these statistics that I have here are from the organization Thorn.
Sarah, sorry.
Yes.
I just want to back up. Someone had also mentioned
yes.
online extortion and digital coercion. Could you explain
Absolutely.
extortion?
Yes. So let's see. Online extortion, I would describe as trying to get something from somebody in an online environment. So if somebody has sent explicit images, they can hold that against another person by saying, send me money or do this, or I will send this out, or I will tell everybody that you did this. So just holding something over another person, specifically in an online environment. And then digital coercion is just any mechanism of control in those online environments. So whether that is extortion, whether that's forcing somebody to do something, or telling them that somebody in their family has been taken, or whatever it might be, those are pretty big examples, but just trying to force somebody into something in an online environment. And those two definitions, even I get confused on them, they go hand in hand. I think a lot of people can use them interchangeably, but those are just two different words that we've heard pop up, especially in the online environment. Yeah, thank you for asking that. That one gets a lot of confusion, I think. But yeah, so with that, these statistics are from an organization called Thorn. I think that's a really great organization. If you ever just want to read up on that, they've had a lot of good statistics, a lot of good resources and information for youth. But specifically, 1 in 3 youth have had an online sexual interaction. 60% of victims knew the perpetrator before they were threatened. 1 in 3 victims never told anyone about their experience. And so as you can see, these are pretty big numbers that we're facing here. I mean, 1 in 3 victims never telling anybody about their experience. They're sitting in their silence. They're not sure how to go about it. That can be terrifying to experience alone. And I think these numbers also really highlight that this does happen, that youth are experiencing these things. And if it's not them directly, that they do know somebody that's experiencing it. And so just by having these conversations, maybe that youth can help their friend or help their family member that's going through it. And so what seems like a really big thing that maybe might not be affecting the youth that you work with or the kids that you have, it is something that is going on in the community. I think it's really important to highlight these things as they happen. Okay, so we talked about the topic and what that means. Now we need to talk about knowing yourself. So with knowing yourself, there's a couple things that I want us to think about as we have these conversations. First is attitudes. Maybe you have a certain attitude towards this topic. Maybe you have certain beliefs about it. Maybe you have a history with this. Maybe you know somebody that has had or experienced online harm and violence, or if you've experienced yourself, which goes into trauma, and maybe you're just not ready to talk about it yet. Maybe your identity comes into play. There's cultural beliefs, religion, there's just your personal experiences with it and just who you are as a person. All of those things come into play when we're having these conversations. And so it's really important when we're thinking about having these conversations with youth that we understand where we're at in our own lives and our own feelings towards this topic, so that later on in the conversation, if a youth discloses something that is pretty hard to hear, we can understand how we feel about it a little bit more before we engage in the conversation. And then knowing the youth, this one, I think I like to explain it as being a good friend or being a good parent. We pay attention to the people that are in our lives. And the same thing goes for knowing the youth before these conversations. We can pay attention to how old they are. We can think about where they are age appropriate wise. Maybe they are in sex ed classes and they are caring about these things. Maybe they're old enough to have a phone or to have social media. We can consider maybe we're watching a movie with them and an explicit scene comes up and they get really uncomfortable. They make it clear that this is not something that they want to be watching. Those are things to think about in terms of their comfort level and how they might approach certain conversations about online harm and violence. So again, I always just say this is really about paying attention to them, thinking about how old they are, thinking about the experience they may or may not have had given their age. And of course, this is easier said than done, but again, nothing is perfect. It really just helps to pay attention and know who you're talking to. All right, so we talked about being specific. We can now focus on being approachable. So I think a lot of the times people will think about how they can make themselves approachable, but there's not a lot of talk about how to make the environment approachable. And so we want to consider a few things. The first is, what are we comfortable with? Are we comfortable having this conversation with another adult present? Are we comfortable having this in the living room, in your office, wherever it might be? So think about where you're comfortable, because if you show that comfort and you have that open body language and you're a little bit calmer, the youth are more likely to reciprocate that. Second thing is to consider what the youth is comfortable with. And so kind of finding that middle ground, making sure that you're both comfortable with where you're at and how this conversation is happening. And so I like to share if I'm in the car with somebody, that's usually when I feel more comfortable having a sensitive conversation, because I can focus on driving. I can look out the window. I don't have to make eye contact. I have the act of actually doing something that kind of takes away from the awkwardness of it. However, that's comfortable for me. I know that a lot of the times if youth are in the car and their parents are driving, they might feel like they don't have a safe exit from the conversation. They might feel forced in the conversation. And so what's comfortable for me or for the adult might not be comfortable for the youth. And so that's something that we do have to keep in mind. I think the best approach to this is simply asking them what they're comfortable with and finding that middle ground. And I think that is really helpful overall. But also with the environment, think about limiting distractions. think about if you want music on in the background. I think that sometimes helps create a little bit of background noise, but try to keep phones or TVs out of it. We don't want them distracted from the conversation. We want their full presence, their full engagement in the conversation. So something to keep in mind. Um, Another thing to consider is maybe setting some ground rules or boundaries. So we can say, when I'm talking, I would really like it if you listened. Maybe we don't talk over each other. Reciprocate to them, let them know that you're not going to talk over them if they start talking. And so, setting those ground rules and boundaries ahead of time really does create a safer environment, an environment where more people feel a little bit more comfortable opening up. But that's that physical environment specifically. As far as making yourself approachable, we want to first plan the introduction. And so, this is about thinking about how you're going to introduce the conversation to them to start with. And what might seem like a simple task in itself, it is, but if we introduce this conversation in a very harsh or intimidating way, they're going to go into the conversation feeling anxious or just really dreading it. As somebody who was very anxious as a kid, if my mom came in and said, "Okay, we're going to have this conversation tonight, here's 6 hours to ruminate on it," that would stress me out. And so some youth might want you to come and say, "Hey, can we have this conversation right now?" Again, asking them. While other youth might want that time to think about what they're going to say, to plan it out, and have a little bit more space before the conversation starts. So ask them. Just say something like, "Do you mind having this conversation right now? When would be a good time?" With this, my suggestion would be to have a set time in place. If they say later or if we push it off, chances are that conversation isn't going to happen when it needs to. And so just make sure you set that time if the youth does want to push it off into the future, just so that it doesn't get pushed too far out when things just start to be forgotten about. So something to keep in mind. And then planning for participation. This is all about how we're going to be in the actual conversation. And so we can think about actively listening. Oh, that's a good question. What if the answer is never? So that's a really good question, because that's probably going to be an answer for a lot of youth. And with this, it's really important to emphasize your role as the adult. And whether you're a parent, you're a caretaker, guardian, youth leader, whatever it might be, emphasize that you are there to keep them safe and that these conversations are important to have. And I think it's okay to actually enforce that. And so there will be pushback a lot of the times, but if you say, "We are going to have this conversation, I'm going to give you some time to think about it. We're going to have it at X time," I think that's completely okay to do that. With that, of course, there's going to be pushback during a conversation. All of this is much easier said than done. They're probably going to have some hesitancy to even open up. That's completely okay. If we continue to approach these conversations in a collaborative way, if we do check those emotions ahead of time and we keep that language calm and shame-free, that conversation maybe might not go well the first time, but they do know that you are not there to judge them. You're not there to get mad at them. And so it'll take time, but that conversation will hopefully pick up and continue in the future. But that focus for that moment is to just ensure that they know you are available to talk. But again, I think it's completely okay to set that time if they do have that response. Hopefully that answers your question. And again, much easier said than done, for sure. But with planning for participation, actively listening, that also goes into creating that safe environment for them. If they're not engaged in the conversation and you just let them know, "I am here to listen. I can't force you to speak, but know that when you do speak, I am going to listen. I'm going to be here for you. I'm going to hear what you have to say." I think a lot of the times when youth get frustrated, it's very easy to get frustrated back at them or to get mad or even shut down the conversation by having that anger come into it. And so this is all about making sure that we think about how we are going to act ahead of time so that when the time comes, we can have a little bit of a step back approach and see the full picture and know that this whole conversation, the focus is on the youth and their safety specifically. All right. So going into feelings, this is the one that I have touched on a little bit, and it's something that is big. Again, everybody has big feelings. It's gonna happen where we get mad sometimes, where we maybe say something that's too harsh. Again, completely normal. these conversations are not one and done. I always like to say that ahead of time when we're checking our emotions, just because we're not perfect. Simple as that is that we can get mad and that can happen, especially when we're having a frustrating conversation. But with feelings specifically, like I said, we want to check those emotions. We want to think about how we feel about this topic ahead of time. And this goes back to being specific. For those that were here at the beginning, I told you all to think about how online harm and violence feels, what that topic means to you, because chances are, if a youth comes to you and says, I sent this explicit image, or this person is bullying me online, whatever it might be, you're going to have a pretty big internal reaction because you want to protect this youth. You want to make sure that they are safe. And when they tell us that they're not, it can be pretty upsetting. And so, if we practice checking our emotions and think about what the end goal is for this conversation, it's much easier to continue without having those big outbursts that we need to come back from. I do like to say again with this, if you do have that outburst, everybody's human. The best way to respond to that is just, I'm sorry, I need a moment. That was a big thing to hear. I do want to help you and I'm here to listen. I just need to take a moment. Sometimes that conversation can continue from there. If they're really offended or they're really upset by the reaction, it's okay for them to walk away at that moment. It's okay to pick up that conversation at another time. The last thing we want it to do is force them into telling us something, because that is just going to shut their insights down. They're not going to want to say anything about it after that. So if it's a little hard to check your emotion in that moment, that's okay. We are human. It does happen. I always like to share that. But with checking your emotions, here's a very simple yet great example that I like to share, where this is something that we have to check our emotions for. So if you've never gotten this question, or if you remember the first time that you got this question, it's a moment where you're like, oh geez, how do I respond to this? Especially if it's not your own kid, because you're thinking, what's appropriate to them? What have their parents talked about? Or if you're the parent, you're thinking, oh my gosh, like they seem so young. Why are they asking me about this? And so this is a really great moment where we just check our emotions. So it doesn't have to be those really big, serious conversations where this happens. I think it's actually really helpful in any situation to just think about checking your emotions first before responding. And then with feelings, we also want to validate and reassure them. We want them to know that they did the right thing by coming to us, whether the conversation went well or not. Thank them for coming to you. Let them know that you are here to talk to them whenever they need it, and reassure them that they made the right decision, that you're going to help them become safe if they are in an unsafe situation. With this, if the conversation doesn't go well, like I said, they now know that you're a safe adult if you are practicing these steps, if you are using that judgment-free language and you're actively listening. And so that goes into the validating and reassuring that I'm talking about, just creating those safe environments and then reminding them that you are available to talk and that your focus is to keep them safe. And then start by believing. This is a nationwide term. It's an entire campaign that's used. It's also really big on Utah State's campus. They have an entire Start by Believing Day, which is awesome. I always recommend people go to that. It's actually really fun. Get to know a lot of people there. But Start by Believing is as simple as it sounds. If somebody shares with you that they've been harmed or that they harmed somebody else, the first thing that we want to do is to start by believing them. Chances are, if somebody's sharing something that happened to them, they're afraid they're going to be met with blame, guilt, or even shame for what happened. And when that does happen, when they are met with that response, they're much more likely to step back and not share their experience. And that's the last thing that we want, specifically survivors, to experience. We want them to share their story. We want them to be able to access support and get the help that they are looking for. So if anybody ever shares anything, I always say just start by believing. I think that's the safest way to go. With this specifically, I always like to point out that it's not our jobs to know what the truth is or to figure out the truth. Chances are in these conversations, we're maybe not detectives. I don't know everybody's professions, but I assume if you're coming from a guardian standpoint or a parent standpoint, you're not a detective in that role. And so we don't need to figure out what the truth is in that situation. If they are telling us something, it's clear that something's going on, regardless of what's true, and that they are seeking help. And so It's our jobs to keep them safe and to believe them so that we can continue the conversation. We never want to shut it down, first and foremost. Okay, we're on the last step of the framework, which is to empower. And again, this is all about normalizing the conversation. And the best way that we can do that is to first provide resources. So I always like to point out that research is your best friend in these situations. We started by being specific, by learning what the topic was, because that really does make us more comfortable in these conversations. And it can also make youth more comfortable. And so if the conversations don't go well, we can point them to resources that maybe might be a little bit more helpful to them or that they can look at in their own time. And so if that conversation doesn't go well, let them know of a research or a resource that you've researched that you feel comfortable sharing so that they can reach out to that, they can read more about it and know that they're absolutely not alone in what they're experiencing. And sometimes youth are going to be a little bit more comfortable looking at these resources first, seeing what's out there before having the conversation. Sometimes it takes them looking at that to normalize the conversation and for them to realize, okay, this is something that I actually can talk about, something that I probably should talk about. And then check in periodically. So after the conversation, you can ask them how they're feeling, ask them to come to you anytime, or just let them know that you're available to talk, whatever reason it might be. It can be pretty daunting, I think, to start the conversation themselves. I think even as an adult, it can be really scary to continue going to a person and keep asking for that support and help. And so when you check in periodically, you're opening that door for them to keep coming to you. And eventually it'll get a little bit easier for them to reach out for that help as they build up that skill over time. And then going along with that, initiate future conversation. This can just be introducing new topics to them, maybe saying, hey, I read this the other day. It says that youth are at risk for this. Do you want to talk about it? Is it something you've experienced? Or just asking them how they feel after that conversation happened. So maybe it's been a couple days, a couple weeks. You can just touch base and say, hey, we talked about this. Is this something that's still going on? Do you need any extra support? Is this something you want to talk about? Again, opening that door to continue those conversations. Okay, we're going to skip through that. So just to reiterate, being a safe adult is all about being specific, approachable, addressing our feelings or checking our emotions, and empowering them by normalizing these conversations. I think the most important thing to pull from all of this information, because I know it's a lot, is that these are normal conversations to have. They're really important to have with youth to keep them safe. And the goal is that if we continue having these conversations, we can start with that primary prevention overall, which stops the problem before it starts. The youth feel comfortable coming to you from the beginning and learning about how to stay safe online or how to stay safe in any situation so that we're not focusing on fixing the problem after it's happened. So that's the goal with this SAFE framework. I hope you all found it helpful. It really is something that can be easier said than done. I think working with youth is one of the biggest examples of how things can go different every single time. It really is case by case, but making sure that we are staying shame-free, that we are believing them, and that we are giving them that safe space to talk is the best thing that we can do to continue these conversations and have them to keep youth safe. But that is what I have for being a safe adult. Does anybody have any questions about CAPSA or anything in this presentation?
Please feel free to write in the chat. I'm not sure if you can unmute your microphones to use your audio. You can try that, or if not, if you'll just put your questions in the chat. Yeah, if you could give. So I think they're asking for a non-shame-free conversation, an example of a, correct me if I'm wrong.
Oh, yeah. If that's what they're asking, I think that's a great question. So an example of a judgmental or shameful conversation is what I'll call that, is when we are using language like, well, what did you do? How did you respond? Or why would you do something about that? Questioning their motives in the conversation, getting mad at them. Like I said, we're not law enforcement, we're not detectives. So when we're yelling at them for something that they've done, or we're guilting them saying, you shouldn't have done that. Why would you do that? Language that shifts the blame onto them as opposed to whoever's causing them harm, I think is a pretty shameful conversation to have. That's where people start to feel very uncomfortable. Another example being just using language that feels very harsh. So, not necessarily saying, why would you do that, but bringing in just a lot of anger into the conversation where somebody doesn't feel heard, they don't feel valued, and they're not feeling empowered to continue the conversation. I think that's how I would define a shame conversation. And it can look different for a lot of people. Let's
Right.
see.
Okay, so they don't have the option to unmute, so Bill, we'll just use the chat. So this is a specific scenario where a 6-year-old is having accidents at school with wetting pants every day. And so getting burned out, not knowing how to help him get over that without making him feel shame. That's a big one for kids, especially at school.
So, I'll preface this by saying that I am not a medical professional, so I will be very careful on how I answer this. But the number one thing that I would do would be to let them know that it's okay. Like it, not saying that they should continue doing that, but letting them know that they're not alone, that this does happen to other individuals, and that you guys are going to figure it out together. I think using language that is more collaborative as opposed to telling them that they shouldn't be doing this, that this is such a horrible thing to be happening. Not saying that you all are saying that, but just showing them that this is something that you all will figure out together and that you personally or you as parents are not judging them, that you guys are going to figure it out together and that they're not alone and it's okay that these things do happen. I think a lot of the times that pressure can come from feeling different. I think even simple things like where a kid dresses different, or in this example is wetting their pants, they're going to feel different. And I think that really does play a big factor in how they address the issue.
Yeah, I agree. And I would add to that that if this is a new thing where a kiddo has previously not been doing this, where it's a skill they've acquired and now you're seeing regression, that it would be a good idea to talk to a pediatrician because there could be medical factors or it could be something that's causing stress or anxiety. There's lots of different components that might be at play there. So if it's regressive, reaching out for that support is a really good idea. And love, Kara, what you shared about just we're working on this together. We're a team.
Mhm.
Love
I think
that.
that goes for any situation with youth, honestly. I think we talked about in the beginning that question of what you want for youth, and so many people said they want them to feel happy, to feel safe, and a big factor in that is a lot of the times youth really do feel alone. I'm pretty young, I would say, and even with social media, there's so many things that I do not understand. And I think when adults start to have that disconnect with youth where so many different things are happening that we just have never even experienced, they can feel pretty alone. Even things that maybe we have experienced, kids are always gonna be like, well, you don't know, like it's different for you. So just letting them know that they're not alone in what they're experiencing.
Yeah. And I think that shock factor on our face goes a long way if we can remain neutral and supportive and understanding rather than like shocked. We have a friend who his son approached him and wonderful that he felt safe doing this. Sat down with his dad and let him know that he was having a problem with pornography. And I just thought our friend did such a fantastic job. He said, "You're a good dude. We're going to figure this out."
I love
That's
that.
such a good example of he didn't look shocked or, you know, disproving, that unconditional positive regard always and refraining from that judgment. And that's so shame healing, that type of response. Look, we're gonna figure this out. I'm so glad you came to me. I'm so glad you told me. Um, we're gonna work on this.
That's a really great example. I really like that. I can't emphasize enough checking emotions. I mean, it goes for any conversation, regardless of who you're talking to. People are always going to shut down, I think, when somebody has a big reaction because they're thinking, oh, maybe I shouldn't have shared that. Always check those emotions. And that's just the most trauma-informed approach that I could think of. Any other questions?
Some teachers are strict about bathroom usage. Make sure teachers are allowing easy access to the bathroom. And that's a great suggestion as well, as talk to the school. Is it prohibitive that the bathroom is accessible? So good suggestion there too. Would be so yeah, I mean, I think if they're wearing pull-ups, if nobody else knows, you know, um, again, I would ask the pediatrician on that one. And I can assure it won't last forever. It feels like it. When you're in that moment, it feels
Mhm.
like it. But it won't last forever. So yeah, definitely working with the school, working with the pediatrician on that one. This one is always find myself trying to fix instead of listen to my 13-year-old.
I think that's one of the most common things any parent will experience. Anyone in any relationship at any point, I think. Um, I really do like to share that it's about understanding our roles when we are talking about that being approachable section. It's really important to think about what our role is in that conversation. We're not therapists, most likely, given our relationship with the youth. Again, we're not law enforcement, we're not detectives, and we're not there to get mad at them. It's really easy to do that, I think, and I gotta be honest. Sometimes it's really easy to get mad at them, depending on what they tell you or something that they've done. But we're there to keep them safe, and if we make it clear that our role is to protect them and to make sure they feel seen and heard and feel safe, it that really does go a long way. And I actually do think that it creates a good pattern for the adult, the parent as well, just to have those skills in place and start building on that so that we can stop trying to fix and start listening, which sometimes situations need to be fixed. I think that's just normal life, honestly.
Yeah, I think that oftentimes most of us have that initial urge to fix and it's not always what's needed. So allowing ourselves, giving ourselves space and that pause, and going in with that mindset, like you said, Kara, I think is so helpful. And maybe even asking, do you want do you want my thoughts on this, or do you just want me to hear you out, clarifying what they are hoping to get from us too, I think can be helpful. But just that self-awareness around recognizing our urge to want to fix is huge. That's half the
Mhm.
battle right there, is just a recognition of it. And then we can slow ourselves down and pivot. Oh, but I learned
Absolutely.
this. And so,
That's exactly what you shared is what is something that I share in our service awareness presentation, where I tell people how they can safely and effectively respond to instances of abuse, or if somebody discloses a situation to them. Always ask what that person is looking for, especially if it's an adult, because they are able to make their own choices. And abuse is very broadly defined as taking somebody's power and control from them. And we can give them that control back by having them figure out what kind of support they want from us. And so it's really, really important to see what support they're looking for.
love that. And she said she doesn't want me to fix. Surprise.
So fair.
Surprise. Yep.
Mhm.
Well, Kara, thank you so much. This was really so wonderfully delivered and so helpful. I think that all of us need this information and it can make such a difference. So I hope that everyone who's here tonight will share it with your people that are close to you, and they'll share it with their people that are close to them. And we will make the video available for you as well. So let me, if it's okay, I'm going to share my screen so that I can bring up our QR codes, because all of you who are here, let me see if I can find my page now. you all have the opportunity to, let's see, fill out an evaluation for us if you would. It's really helpful for us to get that information. Let's see. For some reason, it's not bringing up what I need it to bring up. I'll try again. The evaluation is completely optional and it is also anonymous. So we don't know who's filling it out. Um, Let me just bring up the QR code. If you filled out the evaluation, there's an option to opt into a free drawing, and the prizes are really good. We've got dinner for two, we've got activities for your family. These are really good prizes. So I would hope that you'd be willing to fill out the evaluation for us to give us input and feedback. We want to be able to provide content that's relevant for you, that's helpful for you, and also to give you a prize for your time for doing that. And if you opt into the prize drawing and you are a winner, I will notify you within 1 week of tonight, and then I'll give you the address for the Bear River Health Department where you can pick up your prize. If you are a practicing professional and you've been with us tonight, you're able to take the CEU survey right here, and then that way you can enter your email address and we will go ahead and email you a 1 hour CEU certificate for being here. So I would ask you to help us out with that. And then I would love to remind you that next month we also have a very informative and content-rich evening. We have rented the Utah Theater to show a screening of a documentary called Resilience. It's the biology of stress and the science of hope. We will have a panel of professionals. They will be from the medical profession, law enforcement, schools, local agencies, and we will have that conversation around adverse childhood experiences and positive childhood experiences. So we hope that you will come. This is really for parents. If you do have teenagers you want to bring, I would just make sure that they're over 16. We do talk about childhood adversity and trauma, so just know your youth, know your topic, know your youth, and vet that. But we're really excited for that. And I think that concludes our webinar for this evening. So thank you again for taking the time to show up for you, to show up for your family. Remember that parenting is done in small moments, small repairs, and small shifts over time. So even just noticing one thing new tonight is enough. And we are just in this village together. So I hope that you feel connected as part of a community that is really excited about good parenting strategies and how we can better help our youth navigate the complexity of the modern world. Kara, thank you so much. We appreciate you and CAPSA for providing this information for us, and we hope to see you in future webinars, and I hope everyone has a wonderful evening. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks. Have a great night. See ya.
Bye. Thank you.